Hi, everybody. This is Ira Winkler with today's interview for the CruiseCon channel from our upcoming speakers. Today, I'm interviewing Steve Shelton, who's not an upcoming speaker for CruiseCon West, but he will be in at least a career track on CruiseCon 2026. So yes, there will be a CruiseCon 2026 if you haven't heard that yet. But and the reason I'm doing this now is Steve is actually an expert on the careers issue, burnout, things like that, the psychology of being in the cybersecurity profession. And I just have way too many friends who have been laid off in the recent past. And I wanted to get Steve on. Steve runs Green Shoes Consulting. I think I got that. When he comes on, he'll correct me if I'm wrong, which I may be. But Green Shoes Consulting, he goes into organizations and helps address stress, burnout, and the like. And I wanted to talk to him today also for potential attendees or at least viewers about if you are laid off, what should you be doing now, both from a mental, physical, and hopefully an operational perspective to get things back on track. So with that, let's introduce Steve. And Steve, is there anything you'd like to say about yourself that I haven't yet?
Well, there's probably plenty, but first of all, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. I think the thing I wanted to make sure that we mention up front is the fact that Green Shoe Consulting is conducting and wrapping up the industry's first evidence-based research on stress and burnout specific to CISOs. So we're interviewing 40 CISOs across the country, and then we're going to provide and publish those findings in a state of stress report that'll be available come August.
Okay, that's awesome. Maybe we'll include that in an upcoming cruise con at some point. But in the middle of this, so let's talk about, again, unfortunately, layoffs, because that's the current focus, because too many people are either employed or unemployed, or maybe even have fear that they will be unemployed in the near future, given, today Microsoft, I think, announced 9,000 layoffs. Some of them are likely going to involve cybersecurity professionals, among other people, and it's not unique. So, what do you recommend? Let's just say first, for somebody who just found out that they're laid off, what can they do to? I mean, what should be their reaction? And it's easy to say what should be their reaction, but if you had the ideal world, what would you recommend they do first?
Um, a few things. I think from a reaction standpoint, it's normal to feel a mixture of feelings, right? So sad, fear, anger, even a little bit of joy, just not having to go into the office or do the job. But there's a variety of feelings that people are going to feel with that, right? So I think the first part to acknowledge is that it's a loss. And especially when it's not your choice, we call that an involuntary loss. So the idea being there is going to be a mourning and grieving period to that. So give yourself some space to be able to grieve that loss and mourn that loss. That's first and foremost. And then what we tend to get into is this idea of like, we focus on controlling the things that we have control over. And when we start to focus on things that we don't have control over, which is a lot more than what we actually have control over, we tend to get more frustrated, angry, irritated, annoyed, all of the things that take us away from focusing on being our best and focusing on the positive, optimistic things that we actually have control over. So I
So
think that's a big part.
So, what would be the things that a typical person who is just recently laid off in cybersecurity have control over in this case? Because it's easy to be overwhelmed and to feel completely out of control. But you're right, there are things you're in control. But what would you recommend people look to first and second, third, fourth, and so on to get some element of control back in their lives?
Yeah. So first, I'm a big believer. We're a big believer at Green Shoe of understanding who you are and what you stand for, which is all based on your values, right? So this aspect of understanding what are the values that guide your words, your thoughts, and your actions because we have control over our thoughts. We have control over how we choose to respond to a situation. We have control over our attitudes, the energy that we have a certain situation, those types of things. And so really understanding what are the values that drive who you are is extremely important, and getting those down to 3 or 5 values. It's not an easy task. It can often take quite a bit of time to really get down to those nitty-gritty values that drive those things. But those really are your foundation and your anchor for anything, any experience, any situation that you're in, because it's really easy as adults to align our identity, who we believe we are, to our jobs. So when there's a break between your job and your identity being attached to that, that can be really detrimental. So understanding who you are and what you stand for is critical to be able to really kind of connect or step back into your own power as an individual, right? So understanding what you're all about. That being the first thing. Second thing is, it's really easy to isolate, which drives up the loneliness factor. It makes things harder in terms of feeling like you have the ability to really have any control or ownership or influence anything in your life. So opposed to going into that loneliness kind of dilemma, the other aspect is having support. So whether that's spouse, close friends, family, peers, it's why networking is such an important thing or activity to be focused on. The more that you can lean into your community for some support during that hard time is a really big aspect of managing and maintaining mental resilience. Also, creating a routine. So we're also big on finding the silver linings behind things, right? So any adverse situation also has an opportunity for growth and learning. That involuntary job loss gives you an opportunity to really focus on things that fill you up and help kind of bring some joy into your life. So one, leaning into your hobbies, setting up a routine throughout the day so you're not just allowing yourself to sleep in and then that leads to other things not getting done, having that routine. And then the other part then is also creating some, I'll say, mental stability, whether it's working with a career coach, somebody to help improve your resume, doing the things job skill wise in order to set yourself up to create a strategy, some goals around how you're going to approach looking for the next career path. We're also big advocates and big believers into envisioning what environment and what role is the best for who you are and what you need. So not just taking the next job that comes your way, but understanding where you thrive, what's the environment that fits for you, and are you doing the job that you're really meant to be doing? Mm-hmm. So reflecting on those things.
Yeah, one thing I would also recommend, this is personal, but I would really recommend people get a physical exercise program together, because physical exercise helps endorphins. It helps at least make one part of your life feel good for a period of time, and it's something you can control. But going along with this, something else that seems to be a factor, a lot of people are embarrassed to be laid off. And that is one of the problems where you mentioned reaching out to community is clearly important, but you don't want to say, hey guys, like for a lot of people, it's a major stumbling block to put that message up on LinkedIn and say, hey, I'm out of work. Can anybody help recommend work? Because I don't know about you personally, but I know I'd say just about every job I ever had since after I entered the profession was due to relationships, networking, and things like that. So how would you recommend people deal with the mental aspect of acknowledging that they have been laid off and proactively accepting? I don't want to say accepting the embarrassment, but I think you know what I'm getting at, and maybe you could phrase it in a better way than I just did. But what do you recommend there?
So I would also lump in with the embarrassment some shame, right? So shame is a great diminisher of confidence and an inhibitor for action. It can also go the opposite way for some folks, right? So one is, you're exactly right. If you're posting on LinkedIn and saying, hey, I let go, there's an aspect of some embarrassment, some shame behind that. So one is, that's why it's really important to have a support group around you, whether it's a couple of people, if you have a group of friends, whatever it is, having somebody that you can go to just to get that vent and get those feelings out, right? Acknowledge how you're feeling in the moment, being able to check in with somebody else and get those things out. So having that group is one thing. Secondly, it's accepting the situation, right? So the idea is somebody could look at being laid off or going through a reduction in force is really detrimental to their identity and who they are and their value. The reality, though, may be very different than that, right? Like, we are, each one of us is our own worst enemies in terms of our biggest critic, and constantly assuming that others see certain things that we're thinking or feeling when the reality is that's not the case. And then being able to really reframe and question, is how you're feeling the reality? To accepting the situation for what it is, but then really reframing how you're thinking and feeling about the situation, right? Reframing is such a positive tool because our minds are set to go to negative and default to negative feelings in the first place, because that's part of survival instinct. But the idea is that those negative feelings don't always match reality, right? So just because we're feeling embarrassed, feeling ashamed, doesn't mean that's how others are seeing us. And so really being able to acknowledge, like, this is how I'm feeling in the moment. The reality is, if the tables were turned and if somebody else was fired or let go from their job, would you still want to help them find another job and help them out? Most people would answer that question as yes, I would want to help that other person out. Well, if that's the case, maybe it's possible that somebody else is not looking at you as less than or not as having as much value because you got let go. Maybe it's just something that happened and we don't need to put any judgment on it.
That's actually I would almost call that reverse empathy, where, people really need to understand from everybody else's perspective. Like, the reason I'm doing this is I feel terrible for, my friends and even people I don't know who have been let go for no good reason whatsoever, except, you know, economy, tariffs, whatever the case is, that just proactively impacted their positions. So I think people need to accept that it's unfortunate, but it's just a fact of life that we know people are let go. And I mean, I hate to jump on the horse. I hate cliches, but that's, I mean, I hate to say it, but one of the parts of shame is you have to take care of yourself, your family, and those around you. You might have children in college or other schools that need to be paid. Anyway, this is your interview. We have 2 minutes, and exactly 2 minutes. Do you have any closing remarks before I end this?
I think there's a big aspect of, to your point, that it's really easy to throw ourselves a pity party when we're not feeling well, but understanding what we have control over, and really also that aspect of the fear and the shame or the embarrassment. I'm a very big believer that leaders lift others up. And so if you're that type of person where you would be willing to lift somebody else up when they're struggling, the same goes for anybody else, right? So just because that's one way you act, and maybe you've had experiences where others didn't do that, well, if they're really your friends and part of your peer network, I would imagine they would be looking out for you just as much as you're looking out for them. So understanding that, lean into that, and then also give yourself some opportunities to grow and skill up when you've got some time off. So it's opportunities to, that's the biggest thing, is finding the opportunities in any adversity, the silver lining. There's plenty to be found. So it just depends on what you're choosing to focus on and whether or not it's something you can control or not.
Okay, well, that really is just gives me enough time to close up perfectly. So all I can say is thank you so much. I probably will have you for another interview sometime in the near future, especially with the burnout study. But thanks for sharing, and hopefully this will make somebody's life just a little bit better. So thank you.
Yeah, I will add one last thing. I know we got to wrap up, but being on the boat, I just saw somebody on LinkedIn mention the layoffs again, but the boat is going to be an awesome opportunity to connect with leaders and practitioners in the industry, network, build those connections that can help lead you to the next role that you're looking for.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I don't know if I'll have to cut this out, but really, we did create a sense of family that was invaluable for people to reach out to in the future. So thank you so much, and we appreciate it.
Thank you.